Welcome back to the Innovative Accountant Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Coquell, and we have a very fun and timely podcast for you today. Normally, our guests are accountants, wealth managers, finance professionals, and today we have a leading travel expert as our guest, and the timing couldn't have been better with the snow on the ground and cold days of winter approaching. A lot of our CPA listeners today are seeing their snowbird clients leave south for warmer clients and escape the winter. They're gearing up for their busy season and wondering how they're going to recharge the batteries before that. So it's a perfect time to talk travel. And we couldn't have a better guest joining us today. Welcome to the podcast, Robin Esrock.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, so maybe, Robin, before we get started, I'll just go through and give a little bit of your background just so the audience understands what you've been up to, which is a lot. So Robin is an international best-selling author, TV host, journalist, and speaker who has spent over a decade in search of the world's bucket list experiences, sharing his discoveries with millions in print, on television, online, and in social media. Robin is a former travel columnist for the Globe and Mail, MSN, Outpost Magazine, and the Vancouver Sun, and currently writing an op-ed column for Canadian Geographic. His articles and photography have been published in over a dozen major publications, including National Geographic Traveler, the Chicago Tribune, The Guardian, South China Morning Post, Sydney Morning Herald, Toronto Star, Dubai Golf News, Cape Town Argus. So lots going on here, Robin. Visited over 110 countries on 7 continents and covered everything from extreme sports to food, hotels, and festivals. He's a best-selling author of the Great Canadian Bucket List, the Great Global Bucket List, the Great Australian Bucket List, and 75 places to take the kids before they don't want to go, which with a 16 and 18-year-old Robin, I'm definitely going to read that one because sometimes it's tough to get them to do things these days. Producer, writer, co-host of Word Travels, a 40-part series filmed in 36 countries on 6 continents, seen on Travel Channel, National Geographic, Hulu, PBS, Prime Video Outside, on Outdoor Life Network in Canada, City TV, again, over 100 countries and 21 languages that show's been shared with, which is incredible. And it's Word, not World Travels, is probably the most misspelled show in the history of television, which I read it and I was like, I get it. But nominated for Best Documentary Series at the Gemini Awards. Fantastic work there, Robin. From keynotes and events with the likes of TD Wealth, RBC Wealth, Deloitte, VRBO. Thought that was an interesting one. Tourism New Zealand, University of Waterloo. The list goes on and on. I always love having guests on here that have TEDx talks. You've done one on travel, what travel can teach us, and has over 1 million views on that. That's incredible. Founder, principal of Esrocking the World Media, your company. We're going to talk a little bit about that here today, which you've done a lot of consulting work and for different groups and organizations. The list goes on. And most importantly, as you said today, you're in Vancouver. You've got a wife and a couple of kids we were chatting about before we got started here. How's things going in Vancouver today?
It's a rainy day in Vancouver, which never happens. And the leaves are turning. I never grew up with 4 seasons. I grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa. Our coldest winter day was basically like a lovely spring day in Vancouver. So just to see the leaves change and the seasons come and, winter's coming. We don't have snow like you have in Calgary, but I love seeing the year, this passage of time with these very definite moments and feelings and emotions and atmospheres. And so I think today winter is truly, truly here for us. No snow on the ground, but it's miserable out there.
Yeah. Well, I was actually just out in Vancouver about a week ago, and I came from the snow in Calgary. It was just solid white and about a foot deep, and was happy to be in Vancouver, even though it was a little cloudy and overcast. Beautiful colors this time of year out there. Lots of great vegetation that we kind of lack a little bit in Alberta. But it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Robin. I look at this and I think, basically scuba diving in Papua New Guinea and racing Lamborghinis in Italy, volcano boarding in Nicaragua. That's a day's work for you from what I'm learning. And basically I want your job. So I want to start off with how did you come to this? How does one get a job ticking off bucket lists?
Yeah, it's not something you can apply for with a job ad. This is something you have to create, this kind of life. For me, it's the result of an accident, really. I love travel. I always love to travel, like many people. And in my early 20s, I backpacked around the world. On these short little stints, I lived in London, the UK, for a couple of years where it was easy to get around. I think I got to about 40-odd countries by the time I was 25, somewhere around there. And but it was never something I ever thought I would do professionally. I did study for a journalism degree, and right away people want to connect the dots. Studied journalism and became a travel journalist. But it's not nearly as simple as that. I had 4 different careers before I fell into this particular job. And this was the result of a car running me down on my way to the office one morning. I was working for a large music agency at a time when the music industry was just being completely decimated by digital downloading. It was a brutal time, and still is. I mean, I watched a $40 billion industry shrink to, I think, $10 billion in the space of 18 months. I mean, and it's never recovered. So it was a bit of a soul-crushing time to be in that industry. And I'm on my way to work, and I had bought a scooter for the summer. Riding along, a car went through a stop sign. An unlicensed driver didn't see the stop sign, didn't see me, smashed into me. And when I woke up, there was a paramedic putting an oxygen mask around my face.
Wow.
Very fortunate to have hobbled away from that. I broke my kneecap. I cracked my patella, and it's a very painful thing. I mean, there's a reason mobsters break kneecaps. It's something you don't want. It's not the break you want. But I still think it's the luckiest break of my life. It was a huge wake-up call about what it is I wanted to accomplish and how quickly things can change. And about 8 months later, I received an insurance settlement, $20,000. So it wasn't $2 million. It wasn't $200,000. It was 20 grand. But I tell people life-changing money doesn't have to have nearly as many zeros as you think. Right. Especially when you're, single, and I was 29 at the time, in a job that I wasn't enjoying, and I wasn't earning that much anyway. And I thought, well, what if I took this money and just cashed it all in and went to travel to all the places I'd want to see and do, and all the things I want to see and do. And I had to avoid Western Europe, expensive places, but I could go and, have a good old time in India, in Central America, in South America, and Southeast Asia. And that's what I did. I quit my job. I bought a round-the-world ticket, and I traveled for a year to 24 countries on 5 continents. And I wanted to remember everything that would happen to me, because that's what happens. I thought I'm going to come back, get a job, settle down, and I thought this is just one amazing year that I've got. So I want to record everything. I want to diarize it. But instead of keeping a travel diary, as I'd done in the past, I thought, let me build a website, because now, there's people can access it and see what I'm up to. My friends and family can follow me, and it will be safe. The diary won't get lost or stolen. And, I built a website, started writing. It started off with 1 post, and then 2, and then 3. And every week I would just keep at it with discipline and diligence. And it was a priority to record what happened to me. And people it just hit, people loved the story. Wow. And the Vancouver Sun, it turned into a column for the Vancouver Sun. And then I thought, if one newspaper will publish me, maybe more will. Started pitching other publications. Not easy, very difficult, but eventually started getting other publications and started seeing a viable possibility of making this a career. That's very, very cool. Turning $20,000 into that is pretty awesome. I'm thinking about that. And what year was that? You started that? Was 2005. Yeah. So it was an interesting time of cultural history, because it was before YouTube, which I rode to my TV show, which we can get to that. It was before social media. So I was traveling with a laptop, and I would be the only person. I'd be in a hotel bar or a hostel, and I'd be the only person with a laptop, and no one had a smartphone. And today, if you travel, it's a very different experience. You know, everybody's looking down like this, and WhatsApp and Google Mapping and everything. And back then, you just had to figure things out, and you had to be a lot more social and a lot more open. But at the same time, media was transitioning a lot. But I just got in there and started getting published all over the place. And my sister-in-law always jokes. She goes, you know, I went backpacking. It was 2005, so 17, 18 years ago. And she was like, and I never stopped.
Yeah, very cool. Love that. With 8% inflation today, though, I'm not sure the 20,000 might have lasted as long as it did back in 2005. So it sounds like you made the most out of it for sure. It's taking it back a little further. Did you say you were born in South Africa? Did I get that right? Yeah. So what made you immigrate to Canada? And obviously you made Vancouver home. How did that all come about?
Well, Canada is very welcoming to immigrants, as everybody knows, and Vancouver is very welcoming to South Africans who have no idea how to deal with snow. I'd met a girl from Vancouver when I was at university in South Africa, and I'd never met a Canadian before. I mean, you've got to understand that for the vast majority of the world, when you say Canada, they think polar bears and igloos. Like, really, it's this vast northern outpost. And that's what I thought in South Africa. It's like, there's just this freezing snow. And she said, no, it's mountains and forests and ocean. It's gorgeous. I got headhunted when I was at university to start building digital media in the early days for a big media company. And South Africa was going through an incredible transition. A lot of it was positive. This was, I watched the fall of apartheid when I was 17, and it was amazing. And there was so much hope and optimism, but there was also an enormous amount of crime, especially in Johannesburg. There were the work opportunities were very, very limited. I came home from work one day, and my friends, who were all like medical students, accounting students, we're all like basically of that age, and there were 4 handguns on the table, and this is not for hunting. Everybody felt they needed a gun to protect themselves, and I thought it was absolute lunacy. I said, we got to get out of here. And if we all got to go, let's all try to go together. So we pulled out a map and we looked around the world, and Australia, well, tons of the South Africans go to Australia, New Zealand, San Diego. And I said, well, what about this place called Vancouver, Canada? And they're like, polar bears and igloos, why would we move there? And I said, no, it's actually quite an amazing place. One of our group had financial means, and he traveled to all our shortlist and one summer, and he arrived in Vancouver on a sunny August day in July. Sunny day in July. And he said, stop the search. This is where we wanted to be, folks.
So you got lucky with the sunny day, maybe.
Yeah, it was absolutely. If he would have come in winter, and ironically, so he put his papers in first. We found an immigration lawyer. We all moved over together, and then we brought our parents and siblings, and we got this whole diaspora that came. And ironically, the guy who said we should all move here now lives in Sydney, Australia. He didn't survive his first winter, but he works for RBC. He runs the Asia Pacific division. So it's just hilarious. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So you landed in Vancouver, the group of you, and you've had some interesting careers even there. You talk about being in the media space there, even in the music business. Talk a little bit about that career before you started your Esrock, the World Media Company. What was that like? It sounds like it was a tough time, but it sounds like you got a lot of good experience out of that maybe led you down this path.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about just chasing a dream, especially when you're young, when you don't have a lot of responsibilities, when you don't have the mortgage and the wife and kids. And my dream was to be in music. I played music, I played in bands, I wrote songs. And when I was in London, I was offered a full-time job and a work permit with Reuters. And I thought, if I don't go for this music thing, it's never going to happen. And fortuitously, Vancouver is a major center for artist management, especially back then, not so much anymore. But all the famous bands from Avril Lavigne and Nora Jones, Dana Kroll, Bare Naked Lady, Sarah McLachlan, Coldplay back then, all managed out of Vancouver. There was a big scene here.
Well, and I even saw Bryan Adams on your list there. Actually, when I was out in Vancouver, Well, the other week he played again and did, I think, his final show, and his 94-year-old mother was there. So great show. But anyways, you were
and they were all clients of two companies. So I thought, well, I didn't want to move to LA and the green cards, and it's a bit of a cliche. So I thought, let me see if I can get something going in Vancouver. Immigrated. I started a record label. We recognized the potential of digital distribution right away. So I started working with Napster when that all blew up. And we were out there trying to raise money in the .com boom. We almost got $2 million from Canaccord. It's a whole different story. But then the market crashed, and we were like, okay, well, let's work on talent. You know, I love making music. I love working with talented artists. And through that, we backdoored our way into a company called Feldman and Associates, Sam Feldman and Associates. His partner is Bruce Allen. So we had Brian Adams was one of the clients. Yeah. And my job was artist development, was to find young talent, to find the rock stars of tomorrow, which was a dream job as well for someone who loves music, but not a dream job when record labels are just collapsing and the music industry is faced with this new innovation, and the rock and roll dinosaurs think that the best solution is to sue their customers. Do you remember that? It was sue the downloaders, and it was like, what are you doing? Like, these are people who love music. It's just a new format. So as that whole thing shook out, I found incredible talent, and I call them a lost gen. There's several lost generations of bands and artists that in any other era would be world famous, but in the era that I was working with them, they now, you know, UPS delivery guys, and some of them are chefs and some of them are teachers, but they would have been absolutely world-renowned rock stars in any other era. So it's just soul crushing. You know, there I am working in this industry I love, but very quickly you get caught up in the legal battles and the politics of it, and you know, suddenly I couldn't even listen to music. It took me years before I could listen to music again without thinking about the image consultants and the marketing and the record deals and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So time for a change, and the universe gives you what you need exactly when you need it. So hence the stop sign being run, and you moving forward. So obviously that accident was the trigger for you to kind of do what you're meant to do. Your company, talk a bit about it. So obviously its roots started there. What does it do today? You're Esrock in the World Media. That's a great name. But what do you do with that company? Talk about all, because there's a variety of different things I understand.
Yeah. Well, right away, I'm an entrepreneur. I mean, you can't just be a travel writer and make a living. There's nobody in this country can do that. Maybe there's a handful of people in the US who can be full-time travel writers. Most of us have to do a lot of different things, and that can be anything from corporate writing or corporate communications, consulting. I'm an entrepreneur. I mean, I've started a few different companies. I've chased a lot of different things. I came up with this idea for a TV show that got made. So it's about all these different buckets of revenue. And you think, well, any time you look at something, it's never as simple as A to B. You know, I get people send me, especially I guess in the millennial realm with Instagram, all these get rich quick things. So all you have to do is this, all you have to do that. And I'm like, it's never that simple.
No.
So I had to diversify my offering. And as a writer, especially in the fragmented, splintered media landscape, that can only pay so much, and it's paying less and less every year. In fact, I get paid less now writing features than I was getting paid 15 years ago.
Wow.
And that's not inflation. That's what the media has become.
Yeah.
So right away I recognized, well, storytelling, okay, I can tell destination stories. I can bring people into a moment. I can share an experience. I have a talent for it. I have an eye for it. Consulting, like how to market destinations and experiences. And then I clued into this idea of bucket list very early. Bucket List only came about in 2007 with the film with Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman.
Yeah, right.
But it perfectly captured a universal desire to want a peak experience. And I feel like it's been with us forever, but it's only been, a few years really. And you can go anywhere in the world and people know what you're talking about when you say it's on my bucket list. I mean, I've spoken to the guy who invented the term, a screenwriter in Hollywood. And he was like, yeah, it's just like this nonsensical term. But people swear it's been within their whole lives.
Yeah, it's interesting.
and I recognize that we want peak experiences, whether you're young or whether you're old. You want not necessarily the most luxurious, the luxury. That's great, but that's not necessarily peak. Peak is memorable and unique, something you can't do anywhere else, and something you'll remember for the rest of your life. And so I realized that's what I'd been focusing from the very beginning on, these kinds of experiences. And I was able to pivot that into building a brand, a trademarked bucket list in Canada, strangely enough, and started kind of helping other organizations go, what is your bucket list? What offering? Your USP, what is it? And let's talk about it, and maybe I can help.
Yeah, very cool. This podcast is really geared at innovative people in their career paths and entrepreneurs, and obviously, you're a perfect guest on that in that regard as well, just because you've done such unique things within the travel business, as you say, having to diversify into all these different areas. Pretty cool to see. So you went from there. Let's talk a little bit about your book, the writing of your book, as well as your TV production that the series that you created. Share a little bit about that with us.
Yeah, so I traveled around the world for a year, and I was making very little money, but I was starting to get assignments. Within travel media, a lot of it is contra. So you get approached by a tourism board, and they'll say, we'll bring you out, all expenses paid. We won't pay you. That was many years ahead, but we'll show you the time of your life if you write about it. And of course, if you're going to have an incredible experience, you're going to write about it anyway. So it's a natural fit. I was, for 18 months when I came back from that first trip, I was going on most amazing assignments, but I was making no money. I was doing odd jobs. I was sleeping on couches. I was house sitting. I was living out of boxes and a suitcase. But then, along came, let's go do the Trans-Siberian Railway, or go down Central America, or go to Borneo. And it was just such a odd lifestyle. And at the time, reality TV was blowing up, and they were making TV shows about everything, ice road truckers and bakers and pawn shop owners, and I was like, well, maybe they should make a show about travel writers, because everybody seems to think I have this dream job. But if they saw the reality of me literally sleeping on a couch, it's quite interesting. And so I researched it online. I literally typed into Google, how do you get a TV show? And came up with a one sheet, which is like a pitch idea. I threw it out into the universe, and that's the second luckiest break of my life, is that I got contacted back by one of the production companies. I was the millionth customer who walked through the door, and the balloons fell. They said, look, we've been looking for a show idea. OLN in Canada wanted to work with this production company. They were looking for a concept, and I walked through the door with with a concept that they could get behind. And 9 months later, there I was with no television experience, hosting, producing, writing a show about being a travel writer, traveling around the world looking for stories. Come back from that, and I had all this amazing content. So that turned into a column for the Globe and Mail. And then for Canada Day, the editor said, we need Canadian content. And it occurred to me that by that point, I think I'd hit 100 countries. And I said, look, I don't know Canada. I've traveled basically something in BC, but not much. Yeah. And they're like, well, if you were to travel in Canada, what would you do? So I researched what I called the Great Canadian Bucket List. These are the experiences that I thought that would be amazing. Honestly, didn't think there was that much to do in Canada, like most Canadians. A publisher approached me the following week, said, can I turn that into a guidebook? I was like, no way. Guidebooks can't compete with digital, with Expedia and TripAdvisor. But I got to thinking, and innovating. I'm like, what if I traveled to every province and territory in search of these experiences, literally did them, and reported back on it, but instead of doing it for a newspaper, I'd do it for a book. And the publisher said, nobody's done that before. And I was like, what? I mean, this was 2010. It's like, nobody's done a book about the most amazing experiences in Canada. Like, well, there's guidebooks. I'm like, yeah, but guidebooks are full of information. Yeah, I want to focus on inspiration. Why? Not the how. And they said, well, here's your advance. It would get me to Regina, maybe. So I approached, I think, about 500 different companies trying to get sponsors, saying, I'm going to be doing this book. And, you know, if you can help get me there, we can make this thing happen. I got, you know, Ford Motors basically underwrote it. I got Fairmont Hotels came in as my hotel sponsor. Got clothing sponsors, sunglass sponsors, shoe sponsors, the whole thing. And that just basically got me the money to be able to pull this thing together. That book came out in 2013, the first edition, and it's been the #1 selling travel book in Canada still to this day.
Yeah, awesome.
It really just hit a nerve of, you know, an immigrant who happens to have traveled everywhere else going, look at these incredible things you can only do in Canada. Who knew? I didn't know. Yeah. And I'm now working on the 3rd edition.
That's very cool. And I would expect that during COVID, when really you weren't crossing borders and people were looking for experiences within Canada, it had to have been flying off the shelves.
Yeah, it did really, really well. And it does very well on a corporate level. It's like a corporate gift because it's not that expensive, but it's a lot of inspiration. You know, it's something, you know, I keep having this discussion with advertising agencies and, you know, they're like, how many Instagram followers do I have? It's like, I've sold 150,000 books. You know, it's not a thumb swipe. These are books that are sitting on the bookshelf, on the coffee table, in the bathroom. The influence is ongoing.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. So, well, let's jump into that a little bit. I mean, I love your story, where you've gotten to where you've got to. So, I want for our listeners today to take something away in terms of inspiration, if that's sort of our theme here today. So let's talk a little bit. It's winter's here, as you said. You started by saying it feels like winter's arrived in Vancouver. Favorite ski resorts in the country? Let's start there. It's probably in your bucket list book, but where are the best places to ski in Canada?
My favorite ski resort is Sun Peaks. You know, Whistler gets all the press from an international point of view. But Whistler's just like, I don't know, it's big, the snow's wet, it's expensive, it's overrun with tourists. I think the BC interior has got, like, you know, amazing resorts. Sun Peak's the second biggest. I've been there a half dozen times. I'm going to be there over New Year's this year. Okay. And I think it's just fantastic. It's the mountains, you know, massive, epic, and it's very self-contained and super family-friendly. Lake Louise Ski Resort, I'm a huge fan of. I mean, I think that the fact that you can ski in a UNESCO World Heritage Site is incredible. You know, you can't do that anywhere else in the world. And as a result, you might see wildlife, or it's just the scale of the region. You know, the 3 resorts, Norquay and Sunshine as well. It's just fantastic. So, you know, it's funny when you go back east and they talk about the ski hills, Mont Tremblant and Blue Mountain, and you're like, the first time I went to Blue Mountain, and I was like, where's the mountain? They're like, that's the mountain. I was like, no, like, are there clouds covering it? Because all I see is a hill. And they're like, no, that's the mountain.
Yeah, we're pretty fortunate out west, that's for sure, with what we've got. And did you you must have taken up skiing then when you came to Canada and you moved to Vancouver? That was probably your first. I took up
snowboarding because that was what the cool kids were doing, which I regret. In fact, I went cat skiing, but snowboarding earlier this year in March, up in northern BC, outside of Terrace. Oh man, you know, I've been heli skiing and on the bucket list and cat skiing, but I snowboard. And when you do that, I mean, you're spoiled. Like you'll never be able to go to your local field the same way. But I was just getting, as I get older, the idea of strapping into a board is just too much. So I actually did a story just before COVID hit where it was a family learns to ski. I did it for Post Media, and we went to Revelstoke, Red Mountain, which is another fantastic mountain, and Sun Peaks. And I was just getting it. I was just starting to get onto a blue ride on skis, and then I took a wipeout and broke my shoulder in 2 places.
I was going to say, hopefully not your kneecap again.
Not the kneecap. You know, a few broken bones here and there. It's a price you have to pay. And I donated my snowboard to the mountain in March, and I was like, that's it. I'm never going to snowboard again. Now I'm just going to start off on the green runs very gingerly, but I want to get better at skiing. So, you know, I always tell people it's never too late. It's never too late to start anything. You just start at the beginning and go with it and go at your pace and time. And the difference is that now that I'm older, I'm not doing crazy jumps and crazy moguls, just happy to do corduroy and just be outdoors. And,
Yeah, very cool. So in Canada, you think of snow and cold, and skiing just fits naturally into that whole conversation. But you did a bucket list book on Canada. Share some of that with us. That isn't skiing. Like, what are those exciting, inspirational things that we can do in our own country if we just want to take the time to travel to another province? Share some of the highlights from that.
This is a very thick book. It's a brick. It's a doorstop. And I didn't think Canada had that much to offer across all these different experiences. I mean, nature is our biggest asset, especially in summer. I think a lot of things with Canada is especially in summer. Heading up north, I think the Arctic is grossly overlooked as a global bucket list destination. We're the Great White North, and yet so many Canadians haven't had the experience of being in the high Arctic. Just the size and the scale and the beauty of the Arctic is overwhelming. I've been heli hiking up there with Parks Canada in national parks that get less visitors every year than the peak of Mount Everest, than the summit of Everest. I mean, these are parks that are the sizes of countries. You have the world to yourself. The Arctic, I always tell people, if you've never been to Yellowknife or Whitehorse, go. At any time of year, there's always something incredible to see and do. And to get out and just see what the North looks like, both from a nature point of view, but culturally as well. It's super fascinating. In every province and territory, I just kept on unearthing stuff that surprised me. Northern BC, you've got the Haida, which they call the Galapagos of the North. I've been to the Galapagos. I think it's entirely fair to compare those two things. Old growth forests, you sail around an archipelago. We got surrounded by whales. See the biggest bears in North America, and it's all protected. I mean, I was like, yeah, that's basically, we don't have marine iguana, but they don't have bears.
Right.
The prairies are completely underrated. I mean, everybody thinks you just look across and your dog can run away for days, that whole thing. And I had an absolute blast. I mean, I visited Manitoba and Saskatchewan, I think about now probably a dozen times in all seasons. And I always find interesting things to do there, just because this is true for all travel. The lower your expectations, the more rewarding and surprised it will be. Right. And this is a problem that a lot of people have when they travel, is they have these unrealistic high expectations, some of which is driven by terrible marketing on behalf of tourism media, travel media. It's like, if you go, the sun will be shining and the beach will be white and you will always win at the casino. It's amazing, and those people are smiling and the roulette is like, it's like, no, that's just not what happens.
Well, it's all those good travel writers like you.
Well, this is what I try to say, it's a personal experience. I've been, when the weather's foul, I mean, that's just what it is. And you just kind of have to roll with it. You can't change what happens, but you can change how you deal with what happens. As you kind of go into each province and territory, if you keep your expectations in check, and for me, that's a really important thing that I try and do wherever I go. I try not to get like, oh, this is going to be the best thing ever.
That's a great comment.
That's almost like you're going to basically sabotage your trip. And if you say, you know what, it will be what it will be. And I'm keeping my options open. And that's when the most amazing things happen, because generally the things we remember are not tourist attractions. It's people that we meet along the way who just kind of bust our misconceptions or the stereotypes. When you have a great conversation, it's when you discover like a random restaurant that you didn't know existed, and you're like, that's the most incredible food I've ever had, And that's true across Canada and across the world. And so that's kind of this philosophy of travel that I really try and impart, is when you go into any place, if you just have an open heart, an open mind, keep your expectations in check, try and limit your options. It's another big thing is, you go into a supermarket and there's 18 types of hot sauces. You always, I'll buy this one, but maybe those other ones are good. Or go to a restaurant, it's like, I ordered the steak, but I don't know, the halibut looked pretty good. And then you can't enjoy what it is that you actually committed to.
Right.
So, just enjoying, like, keeping your options limited, keeping those expectations low, and I guarantee if you go in there with a smile and a curiosity, you're going to have an amazing time.
That's great advice. I love that. People save money to travel and they spend a lot of money to go and do that. And I think, like you say, that probably creates a bit of that expectation that this is going to be, better than anything. And I can even think of examples in my life where you got there and you're always just a little bit, you have great experiences, but that setting your expectations, I think, is really important. So obviously lots to do in Canada, across the country. Let's talk about the rest of the world. Where are your favorite places? You've been everywhere, 110 countries plus. Where do you love to travel to? Share some inspirational stories on that.
Yeah, next week 115. I'll be hitting 115 next week. I always tell when people ask me what are my favorite countries, I always say, what are you into? Because if you're into food, it's going to be very different than if you're into history, and if you're into adventure, if you're into nature. My favorite countries have tended to be countries where I've had some sort of personal connection, or for whatever reason, at that time in my life, that country resonated. For scenery, Iceland is exquisite. I've never seen a country that's that jaw-dropping in terms of its natural assets. Canada, I would say, but Iceland is much more contained. You can see it all within a couple of weeks. I certainly can't do that in Canada. For culture, I love Brazil. I love Turkey. I think it's an incredible country. For food, I love Thailand and Malaysia, Southeast Asia, Indonesia. India is amazing for food as well. Although everyone thinks you're going to get sick, it's like not if you use your common sense. Places like Bolivia. Oh, I absolutely love Bolivia. One of the poorest countries, but you get there, the landscape is so incredible. The Altiplano, the Salar de Uyuni, the largest salt desert is like being on a different planet. South Africa, I can't. Every time I tell people about go to South Africa, it brings so much together and it's such good value on the dollar. Oh my God, your dollar goes very, very far, and you'll eat incredibly well, and you'll see African culture, and you'll see safari wildlife, and you'll see incredible beaches. To live in a country and to travel a country are very different things. But it's hands down, when people say, what are my favorite countries? I'm like, look, I can guarantee if you keep your expectations in check, but if you go to Iceland, Bolivia, Brazil, Turkey, South Africa, Thailand, you'll have an incredible time. You will come back and go, that was amazing. Yeah. But that being said, your experience might be totally different. Who knows what might happen. You'll notice that in a lot of my stories and the countries I mentioned, I kind of stay clear from France. Italy is amazing for food, but I don't talk about Spain. I don't talk about the US a lot. I look for these countries that are somewhat different and interesting, and have something that's unique, and a unique culture and ambience that you'll come back and go, that was like traveling to a different planet right here on Earth.
Yeah, very, very cool. And as you travel to those places, we've got a lot of accountants here listening today, and they work really hard. And often I hear is I just need to get away and relax and hit a beach or do something. What is the most beautiful beach? And these are tough questions. I'm going to put you on the spot. But if you want a beach holiday, I know you're looking at culture and things like that, but where is the most beautiful beaches that you've been to on the planet?
The Maldives, for sure, is ridiculous part of the world. Those kind of, the white sand that squeaks when you walk. Australia has some incredible beaches, but they've got box jellyfish. So nobody's jumping into the ocean. Do you remember there was that movie, The Beach, with Leonardo DiCaprio? Yeah. Right, so that was set in Thailand, but it was actually inspired. The author, Alex Garland, was inspired by a place called Palawan in the Philippines, a place called El Nido, which is the most spectacular beach, like the water and the sand and the whole thing. It felt like the beach, like the movie. Yeah. So that's in the Philippines. Beaches are interesting. My wife grew up on the Copacabana, which is one of the most legendary beaches in the world. And, I'm like, what is it that you're looking for from the beach? You know, let's mine it further. What I love about going to Brazil and to Copacabana or Ipanema is they've got all these stands there, and you walk up and somebody comes and, you know, for like $10, they set you up with a chair, an umbrella, and you put your hand up, and they're there with a ice cold beer that costs $1.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, this is it. And there's just beautiful people to look at. And then people are coming around selling all sorts of weird stuff. And like, yeah, this is for me, you know, this is what I'm looking for from a beach vacation. You know, I don't begrudge anybody with an all-inclusive vacation. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you need to unwind and recharge, people are surprised that I like cruise ships. I don't like the big mega cruise ships. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was on the world's most luxurious cruise ship.
Yeah, I was watching that on social media. You were doing a lot of, I think there was scotch there, wasn't it?
They got 135 bottles of scotch on board, all inclusive.
Yeah, wow.
I got through 71 bottles, which is I still haven't. I still can't actually drink another scotch right yet. I need some time.
Yeah,
it was a lot.
I was going to say, I'm not sure how you'd remember how to write that down. What happened on that trip?
I took notes after every tasting. I'm trying to get that story published with a Whiskey Advocate. I'm like, you know, just to try 71 bottles of scotch in 8 days. I love boats when they're well done, especially when they're smaller, because I love traveling without moving. I think it's a very luxurious, very comfortable way to get around. You remove a lot of the logistical stress. You know, some people love planning everything. Other people just like going with the flow. So usually those people marry each other. But there's no wrong or right way to do it. You know, and depending what you're into, I'll pretty much give you a different answer every time. Yeah.
Yeah, the cruise ships are always interesting, right? I find when you talk to people, they're either pro-cruise or anti-cruise ship. And, you know, COVID, I don't think helped that much. How are you seeing that changing now that we're kind of through that? Or is that sort of picking back up? Is there things to be looking for in a cruise? What sort of advice would you give those that are wanting to maybe try a cruise for the first time?
Yeah, so a bunch to unpack there. First of all, if you're wanting to do a cruise for the first time, go on a smaller ship. Talking about the ship I was on was 200 passengers, but you can do anywhere from 200 to 1,000 people. The smaller the ship, the less kind of commodified the experience will be. You won't feel so nickel and dimed and just be herded along. Those 5,000 passenger ships are insane. And I don't personally enjoy them. Again, anybody's up for anybody who wants to go, by all means. Look for smaller ships and more interesting locations. You can cruise around the Med on a small ship, up in the Arctic. Antarctica is amazing. River cruises throughout Europe, the Amazon, amazing stuff. The food is always amazing, and you meet wonderful people. The staff are great. It's a nice way to do it. COVID definitely came along and as everybody knows, upended tourism. You know, I was about to take a huge consulting contract, and it just vanished within the space of 2 weeks. I had, I think, 9 speaking keynotes scheduled. All of them were canceled. Were brutal. Yeah. But I was able to pivot to doing virtual events, and that's actually worked out to be fantastic. I think I've reached more people than I ever would have if COVID hadn't come along. Especially talking to financial firms. It's been such an amazing niche that I've discovered, and it's been super rewarding. So there's always that silver lining. And the silver lining from a travel perspective is that travel is nice, safer, and healthier than it's ever been. This idea of a vaccine passport, which is already going away. Traveling out of South Africa, we had to have these little yellow cards that said we'd been vaccinated against yellow fever and typhoid and tetanus, and it was no big deal. It was
You've been doing that for a long time.
It's just no big deal. You know, if it made everybody safer, great. You know, I took my kids traveling for a year in 2018 before the pandemic, and you know, I remember seeing my 2-year-old back then, like chewing on the tray table on the plane that hadn't been wiped down since 1990, one, you know, and just like, and just licking and crawling on there. It's like, oh my God, I don't even want to know. And now everything's sanitized and hygiene and cleaner. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty good. You know, coming back now from South and Central America, I flew through Mexico, not being on a plane with masks, and it was a packed plane, and I had a middle seat. You know, it's like, And then I go, well, this is what it used to be. It's not. You kind of got to recalibrate a little bit after the last couple of years, and then you go, oh, it's no big deal. You know, I'm not going to get sick, and everybody's washing their hands like they've never washed their hands before, and it's actually a safer time to travel. Some of the trends, the post-COVID travel trends, are going to be this move towards more outdoor experiences. Glamping is a massive thing. It was already becoming big before the pandemic. Being outdoors in incredible environments, but not roughing it. Fantastic, right? That's how you want to do it. Having space around you, being safe, smaller ships as opposed to bigger ships, traveling to less busy destinations. You know, no one wants to line up at the Louvre for 6 hours to see the Mona Lisa for 12 seconds. You know, those days are done. There's been a lot of innovation with regard to that. So there is a lot of positives. I think what we've seen, you know, when planes were all late and baggage was all getting lost. I mean, I flew through Pearson and there was like 10,000 bags waiting there. And I'm like, you know, those were all the ripple effects of the last couple of years of when they shut tourism down. You can't take the world's third biggest industry after oil and auto and unplug it from the wall, wait a few months and then plug it back in and expect that the software is not going to glitch. That's exactly what happened. And it's now coming online again, and with better systems. You know, let's fix these problems that have always been there. Let's make it more efficient and safer. And that's so as things kind of get back on track, I think it's going to be better than it's ever been.
Yeah, it's, you know, definitely Canada. And we probably hear that a lot just with Toronto. It's been in the news a lot and lots of challenges there with people and just challenges. But it's good to see you think it's an opportunity as well. And it's an opportunity to transform and make that better. So your books. So obviously you've written your books pre-COVID. Any changes or thoughts there post-COVID? Does it change how you look at the relevance of your books, the accuracy of your books? Where are you sort of at there?
So fortunately, by focusing on inspirational experiences and not focusing on information, like where to stay, where to get a pizza, I was able to keep these books relevant, both throughout COVID and also for the next 10 years, because, you know, the Arctic isn't going away. You know, the icebergs in Newfoundland are not going away. Machu Picchu isn't going away. So by focusing on the emotion and the joy of the experience, the books remain relevant. I recently they did a reprint for the Great Global Bucket List, which is the same model, but me traveling around the world. And I had to address the elephant in the room, which is the pandemic. And, you know, when I went through the book, I was amazed at how much of it was completely relevant. You know, owners might have changed hands. Some businesses went under, but re-emerged with new owners. And I said, look, you know, we didn't need a pandemic to remind us that we don't have nearly as much time as we think we do. And there's so much we want to do and how quickly things can change. But along it came. And in a sense, it's really made this corny bucket list catchphrase more relevant than ever. Because we now know that things can change on a dime. You know, that a new pandemic could come along tomorrow, or war, like what's going on in Ukraine. I've got 2 chapters of Ukraine in my book. You know, things can change dramatically. And we're here, you know, the planet with, you know, climate change is changing things dramatically. The planet's not going anywhere. The planet will adjust. It's been here for 4 billion years. But the way we live our lives is definitely transforming and changing. And we want to, you know, enjoy the opportunities while we have them. And that's kind of what I want to kind of push people towards, you know, all the excuses, you know, why not? Well, what are you waiting for? You know, is it expensive? Well, let's talk about how expensive is it? If you're saving for retirement, do you have some money in that retirement to actually go and do the things you've always wanted to do? Otherwise, what's the point? And I have this battle daily with my own parents, convincing them to spend some of their well-earned retirement money on things that they've always wanted to do, as opposed to leaving it for their children. And it's like, we don't first of all, you worked for it. We don't deserve it. And second of all, we want you to be happy. We want you to go out and see and do these things that it's especially because it's going away. Things are changing dramatically out there.
Yeah. And I love your comment about your book going back and going, it's not all just about information. It's about inspiration. And there's not enough of that, it seems, in the world these days. So I'm glad that that's the focus. We have lots of changes. You say, we talk about climate change. You can't open up an article or the internet and not see an article on that these days, about being better stewards of our planet. What are some of your thoughts on traveling as it relates to that sustainability and responsibility? How is that being impacted?
Just before the pandemic, I was being flown around the world to talk about over-tourism. I had this enlightened moment in Bali where I took my kids into the beach and we walked into the waves and we were just covered in rotting plastic. And it was like, I'd heard about over-tourism. I've heard about this really negative impact that tourists were having on communities and the environment in which they were going to, where it was unchecked, where the growth was unchecked. And then it wrapped itself around my 5-year-old kid. And I thought, I'm complicit in this. I'm promoting tourism without promoting responsible tourism. And there's a real push within the tourism industry to come back after the pandemic as a more sustainable enterprise, to be more environmentally conscious, to have a more positive impact on the communities by keeping that money within the communities or employing local people as opposed to foreign companies that take all the money, and leaving, very few, if any, footprints on the places that you visit. So I went to, say, Angkor Wat in Cambodia. I've been there 3 times over the course of 15 years. And the first time I was there, I was Indiana Jones. But there was like just these jungle temples. The second time I was there, I was like, oh, there's a couple tour buses. That's interesting. The third time I was there, you couldn't see the temples. There were so many people. And this has got to change. And it impacts both the environment, but also your experience as a tourist, as going to Dubrovnik, and you can't even get in. There's so many people, So there's definitely a push towards coming back and doing it right. Some countries are taking it very seriously. Canada is, New Zealand, Australia, wealthier countries where they can afford to. Mm-hmm. Thailand shut down the beach. That inspired where they filmed the movie, The Beach. They shut that beach down because it was destroyed, and it's still not open to the public. They're doing a full remediation there. And other countries, are just trying to make up the dollars that have been lost, and it's cutthroat, and they'll do whatever they can. Yeah. But there is definitely a push to they call it regenerative tourism, sustainable tourism, authentic tourism. There's all these buzzes, catchphrases, and it's going to be interesting to see how it all comes back. Yeah. And as for the climate, I started hearing about climate changing the environments about 10 years ago, where I would start arriving in places and they'd be like, it's raining, but it never rains at this time of year. This is very unusual. And then when I crossed the Northwest Passage, I was doing on a Russian expedition ship to track the Franklin expedition, as one does. And we were expecting thick sea ice, and it's a lake up there. The Arctic is where it's profoundly changing. Mm-hmm. And the impact on global trade, because it's opening up the Northwest Passage, the environment, wildlife, communities, is absolutely staggering. And to see it, again, you hear about it, but then you see it on the ground, and you see the captain of the ship going, this is odd. There should be, 5-meter thick sea ice and not just a lake. You go, okay, things are changing, and it's going to continue to do so.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read an article this week, and you and I were chatting a little bit about that Tuvalu. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. I don't think you've been there. Have you been to that country?
I haven't.
Yeah, we were talking about that here in an article this week, where the sea rising is starting to flood their islands, and they're worried that in the next decade or so they're not going to be there. And they were talking about becoming the first digital nation where, if in the future the islands don't exist, their country doesn't exist, and they're trying to push it into the metaverse and, map the island and, save their culture digitally. I thought that was just, interesting but sad. And, thinking about some of those changes and not being able to travel to the place that's home or the place you love, right?
Well, we're getting closer to this world where you will be able to patch in to go anywhere and become anyone. You can already, National Geographic already have some VR experiences where you can go to Antarctica, you can go to Machu Picchu, you can ice climb up a glacier, and you can overlap maps of what it looked like then compared to what it looks like now. Some amazing stuff. It's not there yet. I think that's good. That's a great thing. Yeah. Because the real world is spontaneous and surprising, and it's those things that you can't plan that deliver the best moments.
Well, that's what you said earlier, right? You're going to meet somebody on the path, right?
Yeah. So, I do think that ultimately we will get to a virtual world. I think Zuckerberg is way ahead of his time. But he's you can't argue with a guy betting billions and billions and billions in a company on the metaverse. But we're not there yet, and the longer we can push back at it, the better. But there is going to be a digital world to explore for sure, and universes to explore. So if we can protect these cultures, they were doing the same thing in Ukraine. They were taking pictures and 3D printing, 3D modeling all the artifacts at the museums, in case they get destroyed, so they can upload them into a world where they won't be forgotten. Mm-hmm. It's exciting. It's interesting. It's, things are always changing.
But there's nothing better than the real thing. So
I don't think there's anything better than the real thing.
I think we need to go and experience the real thing. So, it's interesting traveling the world, seeing the world, especially people that are near retirement. They're thinking, I just want to own a vacation property versus maybe traveling the world. How do you see that? What's your sort of view? Have you ever thought about just owning a place somewhere and calling that home? What is that?
Yeah, there were a couple countries or cities that I visited, and I thought, I'd love to live here. So in 2018, we traveled across Australia. I wrote the Great Australian Bucket List, so I did everything to do in Australia. And then I had to go back to Australia to launch the book in 6 months, and I didn't want to come back to Canada, go back there. Thought, well, what if we live in Asia? Let's go to some of these cities and live there, like with the locals, and see what it's like. So we spent 2 months in Chiang Mai, northern Thailand, 2 months in Bali, and 2 months in Hoi An, Vietnam. And we still talk so fondly of it. I mean, especially with young kids, the locals just ate our kids up, and it's amazing how quickly you adjust to zipping around on a scooter and haggling at the market for pineapples and mangoes, and the kids are on the back of the scooter. You got a family of 4, and you're ripping around dodging water buffalo, and when you live in a place, it's very different to when you travel to a place. So that's the first thing I got to say. It's always going to be, when you're on holiday, you have a ambience around you, you have a vibe around you. It's very different than if you go and you live there and you're trying to get internet connected and Hakuna Matata in Kenya. It's like, the whole country runs on this philosophy that no worries, man.
Yeah,
it will happen.
It'll happen
like,
when it happens.
My fridge has been broken for 4 weeks. The Hakuna Matata. It's like, I've always thought about trying to find that next vacation spot that's going to blow up, and you're going to make like just an absolute staggering fortune on property. Of course, I've kicked myself. Man, I saw that was amazing. Years ago, we bought a property in Courtenay, Vancouver Island.
Okay.
Last year, because I finally said, you know what, I'm doing it. I'm going to take out that second mortgage because I do believe that this is going to be a fantastic place to live. Victoria, Nanaimo, it's getting squeezed up the island. And when there's a Costco, and Costco have done their research, and if Costco is in a city of 20,000 people, they got to know what they're doing. So, and even then, when I looked at that property, I was like, okay, there's flooding. All right, so make sure we're away from the flood maps. Right. These are the things you start thinking about.
Climate change, where are you going to own property in the future?
You know, you're going to get a beach house. It's like, is it going to be a beach house in 10 years or is it going to be a bunch of rubble, you know, underwater? So, you know, these are the things to consider. There's a lot of expat communities in Central America, in Mexico. And you hear, like, you know, if there's one thing I can impart, it's that you hear a lot of bad stories about the world we live in. The media operates on a principle of if it bleeds, it leads. I mean, I learned that at journalism when I was when I was an 18-year-old kid. It's like, you know, the more fear a story can generate, the more attention it will get, the more traction it will get, the more eyeballs, the more advertising. So that there's a loop there. And as a result, we get just bombarded with bad information all the time. Not all of it's misinformation. Not all, you know, it's true. But it's, why do you need to hear about a horrific incident that took place in Belgium? Yeah, exactly. What is that relevant to you in Calgary? Yeah. And, you know, but that's what we hear. That's what you look at. And, you know, when you open up the news app or the newspaper, if anyone reads the paper, I look at the news every morning, and it's like, you're going to get greeted with bad news every morning. Very seldom will there be, you know, there's fantastic news out there. Something great happened, some amazing innovation. You just don't hear about it. And when you travel, you see it firsthand. It's everywhere. People are much friendlier and more welcoming and more peaceful. People will rather help you than hurt you. Yeah. I mean, just go into any environment and go, if I need help and I say help, people will rush to help you. They won't take advantage of you. You know, these are the kind of things, like, you can be desperately unlucky, but for the most part, 99.9% of planes take off, land, you get your luggage, great. But you will hear about that 0.1% of the plane that crashes horrifically, and you'll go, oh, it's flying safe.
Yeah, it creates fear. It creates fear to travel, go to experience other cultures, all of that. I agree. I agree. You know, and we've talked about some serious stuff with COVID and climate change, and if it doesn't bleed, it reads, or if it bleeds, it reads.
If it bleeds, it leads. Yeah.
Leads. That's it. Yeah. So now I'm going to have a really serious question for you, and it's, what packing tips do you have for people when they travel? So
you're packing too much. You're packing too much, as I say to my wife every time. You're packing too much. Yeah. You're not going to need all of that stuff. The biggest culprit is toiletries. It's like, for some reason, it's like, oh, I'm going on a 6-star cruise for a couple of weeks. I better take Shoppers Drug Mart with me. You know, it's like, what are you doing? They have anything you need, you can pick up along the way, generally. We tend to lay out everything you think you're going to need, then take half of that. And I guarantee you'll still have a shirt or a pair of trousers that you didn't wear. Yeah. You know, just take the essentials. You know, take some Tylenol, great. But do you really need all the creams and all this? And what if this happens? What if that happens? Deal with it when it happens. Unless you're going to the backcountry, which you've probably not, there'll be a pharmacy and you can just go there and get it if you need it. And it's highly likely you won't need it. Yeah. So I always say, you know, pack for a day in which anything can happen. That you're going to wake up in a tent and you're going to end up at a royal wedding, and your clothing has got you covered. And that actually happened to me in Denmark, where I was staying in a cheap hostel, and I ended up crashing a royal wedding that night. And as long as I had a collared shirt,
you were there. Yeah,
I could show up, and you can make it work. And you know, scarves for the ladies. You know, always pack too much. It's like, just take scarves. You can wear the same dress. You wrap around a scarf. Whoa! You got a whole new dress on. It's amazing. You look beautiful. You know, I'm not like one of those people who say, like, just like 2 pairs of underwear and wash that. I'm not like that extreme. But the lighter you travel, the easier it is. And in this day, right now, I'm still only doing carry-on, even though, you know, things are much better. I'm still like, if I've got more than one layover, I'm like, there's no way I'm checking things in. I just need what I take. What I need with me. That seems to be
the common theme. I think the environment we're in is going to force people to not check bags as much, just to ensure they get what they need when they get there. Mm-hmm. Other quick little tips: staying safe in travel today. What does that sort of look like? Any thoughts, comments on that?
Yeah, we hear a lot about common sense, and you know, what is common sense? Like, well, listen to locals, take their advice seriously. They say don't go downtown at after dark at night. Don't go downtown after dark. When bad things happen, we generally blame ourselves first. I knew I shouldn't have done that. I knew I shouldn't have eaten that pink chicken, or that taxi driver was sketchy. It's like we have an instinct. We hear it, but we don't listen to it. And your instinct is telling you, screaming at you when you're traveling. This feels sketch. This feels weird. This person's ripping you off, whatever it is. And if you listen to that instinct, it kind of will always steer you clear. We always pay attention, of course, to the bad thing that happens, never to the 10 things that we avoided from happening. So listen to your instinct. Ask questions of people. If you're not sure, ask always. And that's true whether you're investing in the market or whether you're, trying to figure out directions, and you're not sure if you should walk through that part of town. Is it safe? Is this cool? Have I done the research? Is there something I should know before I eat the world's spiciest chili pepper? It's like, it's going to serve you well. Yeah, don't do it. It's going to serve you well. It's going to serve you well to ask of people things. And don't. The number one advice is don't panic. Yeah. Bad things happen when you panic. Our our sound decision making goes out the window. Yeah. When the plane's delayed and people start throwing their toys and screaming at flight attendants, and it's not going to make the situation better. No. Remaining calm leads to better decision making. They drill this into your head at a first aid course. Calmness leads to better decision making, and I think as you've seen, like with the market goes topsy turvy, and a lot of the wealth advisors I work with, their clients are calling them, what's going on? What's going on? It's like, don't panic, don't panic. It's like this is the worst possible thing you can do is making a decision when you're spun out.
Exactly. Great advice. And the tech world we live in, everybody's got this phone about 2 inches from their face. What advice do you give people that struggle with unplugging on vacation or while they're traveling? Any thoughts there other than put it away?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I mean, my wife gives me grief about it all the time, that she's always telling me I need to unplug because I do what I do. And because I'm working with editors around the world, and there's no off day. In one sense, every day is an off day. And on the other sense, every day is a work day. But you've got to unplug. You've got to somehow create that break. So if you give yourself I'm allowed to look at my phone for 30 minutes between this time and this time, and that is it. The phone goes down. Anything that happens, you can deal with, especially if you're on vacation. You can, when things are blowing up, you will deal with it tomorrow. If you really have to check, you can deal with it tomorrow. Yeah. Like I said earlier, it's a tragedy that today when you travel, people are looking down and not looking up. And not having the conversation. They're talking on WhatsApp to their family back home, and they're not talking to those people that are just at the table next to you, who are locals, who can give you such an interesting insight into their world, this world that you're visiting. Yeah. I understand, especially for the younger kids, how alluring and addictive devices are. But I don't think it's made the world richer. No. There has to be a turn off button or leave it at home button. I've heard of some hostels, because hostels are really interesting. It's ground zero of travel. It's where a lot of the trends emerge from, where they're having like no device nights. Yeah. You come in and just like high schools, they like put your phone in the box and now you have to mingle. And everybody comes out and goes, those are the best nights ever. Yeah.
Well, that's because, it's just like you said with travel, that the best parts of traveling are the things you don't expect. And if you're too busy looking at your tech, sometimes that stuff's going to pass you by. So, that's great advice. I want to just I always wrap up our discussions with our guests just on books. And at first I started to just, are you writing any other books? Is there, you're upgrading books? What's happening with you there?
Yeah. So right now I'm going to be working on the 3rd edition of the Canadian bucket list. The second edition is massive. So I'm actually going to be paring it down. And it's just, there's so many more experiences. The bucket list is like whack-a-mole. You tick one thing off at the top and 3 more will pop up. So I'm just always discovering new things. So that's an update. I wrote a novel that I'm trying to get published. It's a bit difficult in this day and age, but I'm trying about what I've learned, and I put that into a story as opposed to a memoir, because stories are just so much more interesting and I could have a lot more fun writing it. Reading wise, I try and read books that give me a more positive insight into the world we live in.
So what are you reading these days? What's an interesting book that you'd like to share?
Do yourself a favor. Okay. There's a book called Factfulness by Hans Rowling. Factfulness. Okay. Came out in 2018. He's got a number of TED Talks, and Bill Gates is the guy who's out there saying every person on earth needs to read this book.
Okay.
It's a data-driven look at, I think the slug is 10 reasons why the world is better than you think.
Oh, awesome.
And it's data-driven, it's hard science, and it frames the way that progress is happening in a really insightful, clear, entertaining, engaging way. It's not a very thick book, and every chapter you read it, you go, "Wow, okay, things aren't as bad as I thought," and certainly in terms of the global trends, things are moving in a very positive direction. Admittedly, it was pre-pandemic, but it's still incredibly relevant. He died shortly after the book was published, Hans Rowling, Factfulness. And in a similar vein, there's another book called Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker, also a popular TED speaker. Same thing, data-driven, looking at how the world is basically moving in a positive direction. That when you look at every metric across every graphs across every metric, health, education, economy, lifestyle, gender equality, it's all just getting better and better and better and better. But because we're so in this kind of bubble of media, news, bad news, we just don't see it.
Yeah.
And when you do see it, you go, holy, we live in an incredible world, and we're very, very lucky to be living in the time we do.
That's a wonderful share. Thank you. I'm going to make sure I check both those books out. And the more positivity and inspiration, the better. And that's really been the theme of today, Robin. And I want to just thank you for that. Our listeners, if they want to get in touch with you to learn more about how you might be able to help them, whether it's their travel insights or events or things like that, what's the best way they can go about doing that?
Yeah, so I have 4 blogs, but the best place to find me is at my website, robinesrock.com. Robin@robinesrock.com is my email. Happy to, I read all my own emails and I respond to all of them and would love the opportunity if there's anybody that any listeners out there that want to have a positive thing, share a positive message or talk about travel with their clients or team, please get in touch. And I'm off to Saudi Arabia on Saturday, which is country number 115. All my own lessons, right away, I told my wife, I'm going to Saudi Arabia. She's like, oh my God, like, what are you crazy?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are we hearing? We're hearing the bad stories.
Mm-hmm.
What's it actually like to go there? Yes, there's a lot of issues, and I'm sure I'm going to address them and learn about them. But I'm also, if I can just have one conversation with one Saudi about the world they live in and get it on the ground and not from an article that I'm reading. And if I can come back and go, yeah, it's a country with a lot of problems, but it's also, this is what people they actually think, or this is how they're addressing those issues, or what the future might look like. I think it's only going to be a positive thing. I mean, I'm Jewish. I'm going to Saudi Arabia. For me to sit down with a Muslim Saudi and talk about life, the universe, and everything is the world to me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll look forward to catching up with you when you're back and hearing how that all went. And also looking forward to getting you out for an event through our integrated community and the firms we work with, and sharing some more inspiration on travel with their clients and people that they take care of. So on that note, Robin, I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to day and sharing your experience and passion for travel with us all. I know it was very enjoyable for me. Learned a lot talking to you, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Well, pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Robin. And on that note, that ends this edition of the Innovative Accountant Podcast. Thank you for taking the time. I hope you enjoyed your time with us today.